Welcome to a very special Google Plus Hangout on Air brought to you by Google for Entrepreneurs. This Hangout will be focused on startups in the Middle East. My name is Bridgette Beam. I'm a global manager on the Google for Entrepreneurs team, leading our efforts in Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. Google for Entrepreneurs is our global effort to empower startups and entrepreneurs around the world. We have over 70 partners, programs in 120 countries. Over the past few years, we've really doubled down our efforts in the Middle East, exploring how we can enhance the growing startup community and equip entrepreneurs with the skills they need to be successful. I've been fortunate enough to get well acquainted with the talent in this region, and have been incredibly impressed. Today, I'm excited that we will have a number of the best-in-class entrepreneurs and startups joining this Hangout. To get this show rolling, I'm honored to introduce Chris Schroeder, a serial entrepreneur, media CEO, and author of Startup Rising, The Entrepreneurial Revolution, Remaking the Middle East. Welcome, Chris.
It's fantastic to be here.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yes.
Chris, you have an incredibly diverse background, ranging from your own startup, healthcarecentral.com, one of the nation's largest social and content platforms in health, to working for the U.S. State Department. I'd love to hear a little bit about yourself and your interesting journey, how you got to the point of writing Startup Rise.
Thanks very much. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm really thrilled that you're opening up this amazing forum, because I think the phenomenon of what's happening in startups and emerging markets generally, but in the Middle East in particular, is completely underreported, and I think it's exciting that we have a chance to talk about it. My time in the State Department was actually very brief when I was a kid, but the last decade of my life, as you said, I built this platform in health, but before that I ran all the online businesses for the Washington Post and Newsweek and another information online company before that, which is in the B2B space. And I think what ties it all together is, one, just my ravishing curiosity about how people find and share information, but I think as importantly, how when they have information and they have each other, how they're able to have a real sense of empowerment, right? How they can understand that we're not alone, we're not crazy, and if we can see people like us doing amazing things, then that means that we can do them too. And that to me is the flywheel of empowerment, which I think has been unleashed by this technology. Now, I've traveled all over the world. I've outsourced technology pretty much to every emerging market except for the Middle East. And 2 years ago, I got invited by these remarkable ecosystem builders and supporters of the region, Fatih Gandour, who is a bit of a legend there, who built Aramex, which is effectively the FedEx of the Middle East, and his partner over at Abraj Capital, the founder of it, another amazing man named Arif Naqvi. And they put together in 2010 what was one of the first really large gathering of startup entrepreneurs in the region, and they invited me over to talk and participate and to mentor. In many ways, I look at my entire worldview, but certainly my view of the region, as before that event and after that event, because it was 2,400 young people with a 3,000-person waiting list building world-class technology and ideas and companies at the time. And it told me that what is happening around the world is obviously happening around the world, and the Middle East is no exception.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I've traveled to the region a number of times, and I know that my perceptions before traveling there and spending time with many of the startups and entrepreneurs is very different than after. During the research for your book, you said you traveled there over 13 times just for the research portion. I would love to hear about some of the common misconceptions that you hear about in your travels back and forth, and how your perceptions changed over your many visits and interviews.
You know, speaking particularly in this instance as an American, I mean, all human beings have narrative bias, right? We all get caught in our stories. We like our stories, and they're important. We can actually frame action based around the narratives we create. But the risk when you have that is narrative bias, and particularly, I think, in the United States, there's such one story about the Middle East. And just the act, as you said before, of going there and being there and just seeing so much which is so familiar and yet has this amazing sort of cultural voice to it, societal voice to it, problem-solving opportunity within the region that I think could scale globally in and of itself is such a shot to that narrative that I think is very powerful. And beyond it, I would tell you that is maybe what is most surprising is how much of it is not surprising. Once you get over that hump, I think any entrepreneur anywhere in the world would feel at home in the places I've been, in the companies I've met, and the amazing entrepreneurs who have pitched me as they would anywhere in the world. And that, I think, is where things get very exciting.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think another interesting thing is actually the gender balance being quite different in the Middle East than you would find probably at a typical Silicon Valley tech event. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, The Economist wrote this amazing series this summer that was looking at the Middle East, generally speaking, in a hopeful lens, but then spent a fair amount of time on the entrepreneurs. And they said 25% of all tech-enabled startups in the Middle East are women. I can tell you that I was a judge at a startup competition You have some of these wonderful people from the MIT Arab Enterprise Group with us today. But amazing startup competition in Beirut a couple of years ago, and probably as many as 40% of the participants were women. And as you know, you don't see anything in the time zone of that in Silicon Valley. And it's, I think, very interesting, very impressive, and very encouraging.
Well, it's very different than the perception that we also see on the media.
Oh, yeah.
Of women in the region. I've met a number of fantastic entrepreneurs and companies led by women doing very well.
Absolutely.
I'm curious too, if you look at when you started your company, healthcentral.com, and sort of the environment, even not that many years later, that many of these entrepreneurs are starting their companies in, what do you see as the major differences?
Well, I think that it's very hard to compare the maturity of the ecosystem in the United States with many places in the world right now. And that has a double-edged sword to it because ecosystems matter tremendously. Acceptance of rule of law, how you can get contracts done, relative stability, ability to move goods and services efficiently, from places to places, the educational infrastructure, all enormous things that have been built over decades, in places like where I've started my company. At the same time, what is so interesting is that in emerging markets generally, and in the Middle East in particular, this is a region that has never known landlines. So that means that there's sort of opportunities to think differently and create things in different ways overall. The phenomenon of what technology unleashes is amazingly bottom up. And so that means that people are helping each other, collaborating, teaching each other, the way WAMDA, that we'll talk to in a minute, does, ArabNet has done, where literally just even small, medium-sized gatherings where great engineers teach lesser engineers, the sort of self-teaching aspect bottom up is actually really different and very exciting. We are watching ecosystems being built bottom up as opposed to top down, which I think is going to be fascinating to watch over the next few years.
Yeah, I've seen this a lot, particularly as you mentioned in education. Many of the universities are not prepared to create the curriculum at this point for a lot of the developers needed and the technical talent, but those are being overcome by organizations in the region who are stepping forward and really connecting the right technical skills with the right people.
Absolutely right. So it's not that the top-down is irrelevant because there's an enormous opportunity for universities to step up and some investment to them. But again, what is so also exciting about the technology, like we have with us today, Flat 6 Labs, and they've been incubating this company called NAFHAM, which is effectively like an Arabic Khan Academy tied to the curriculum of Egypt, but allows now over 12,000 videos have been uploaded in basic mathematics and reading and writing skills. They're going to do a unique version of it in Syria. And so it's sort of a marriage of these two things happening in place that I think opens up a very different narrative in the next 5 years.
Yeah, it's amazing. You mentioned in your book, obviously the Middle East is a very diverse region. A lot of these countries look very differently from a political and cultural standpoint. Yeah. But I also see that a lot of these startup organizations and groups have a really strong singular voice. They're really coming together. Can you kind of explain that phenomenon and tell me if you've had the same experience? Yeah,
I'm really glad that you asked it. I think we Americans sometimes like to talk about things in lumps, like the Middle East, Africa, knowing full well not only what is going on in Syria versus Dubai is obviously so terrible at one end and interesting at another end, but of course cultures, societies, histories, even at more local areas than national borders can be so distinct. But I mean, compare it to Turkey, which is a magnificent startup environment. But at the end of the day, there are 70, 75 million people who speak Turkish. There's some connections that are created around the Middle East more broadly or in what used to be the former Soviet Union. But when you think about the Arab, it is a market also, right? 350 million people speaking the same language, aggregate per capita income, higher than India's, very deep shared sense of history and culture, identity, down to simple things like food and all. And it's a very, very exciting connectedness that also, in the beauty of the technology, allows the individuality that both different countries and smaller parts of society can also allow. Yeah, it's very interesting. I know you also do some investing. Have you invested in any companies in the region? Are you interested in? And if so, what are you looking for? So there are two answers to that, because for me personally, in writing the book, I made a determination that I was not going to invest in any company. I wanted this book to be a real step back with as little bias as possible in terms of writing it overall. And at the same time, I've now determined in my life, as I'm about to build another enterprise here in the States, that I'm sure will have connections to the world, that this is sort of the nonprofit part of my life. So I sit on the board of the American University of Cairo School of Business. I'm on the WAMDA board. I'm about to join a couple of other boards. I mentor a lot of young people there. But I want it to be arm's length. I don't want it to be that way. But to the essence of your question, because I'm connecting people over there to New York and Silicon Valley and Washington and other places all the time, there are unbelievably fundable enterprises right now. If I were to make the determination to do that, I know right now places that I would go. And it's no surprise that Dave McClure here in Silicon Valley, the great founder of 500 Startups, went there one time and decided to invest in 3 Jordanian companies and just hosted a Geeks on the Plane in the region, which most people in Silicon Valley thought he was crazy, and yet he and a bunch of the people who went with him came back, could not have been more excited. So the fundable, investable nature of this, I think, is quite clear.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that we're going to continue to see that flow. I'd like to transition now to let many of these entrepreneurs, startups, and tech leaders across the Middle East ask you their questions.
Wonderful.
They're joining us on the eve of their weekend in the middle of a number of storms. We may have some problems with the connection, and we'll do our best to do that. But to begin with, I'd like to start by handing it off to Katharina Ballo with the MIT Enterprise Forum Arab Startup Competition. She comes to us today from Beirut. Welcome, Katharina and founders Shadi, Ali, and Reem.
Thank you, Bridgette. And thank you, Chris, and for Google, for Entrepreneurs as well, for putting together this discussion. Before jumping to the questions, I just wanted to mention, as you may know, the MIT Enterprise Forum of the Pan-Arab region, in partnership with the Community Initiatives, we brought the first Arab Pavilion to the web, whereby we had around 10 Arab startups there in Paris, and we had a panel discussion entitled Middle East Startup Rising that was definitely inspired from Chris' book. The first question is from Shadi Tabara, who's the co-founder of Remaking. Shadi.
Hello, Chris. Shadi Tabara from Remaking. In one of your interviews, you mentioned that you were very positive about the potential of the region. Now, to what level can this potential be fulfilled, given the fact that the ecosystem is still in its early stage?
So it's a very important question, and by the way, it's just an honor to be seeing you guys again, because what you've done and with Hala Fidel, I think, has just been extraordinary pioneers in building the ecosystem. And in a lot of respects, you, the MIT Forum, you guys are a way in answer to that question, because all markets start nascent, right? If we were sitting here 15 or 20 years ago, and I told you that Japan was going to fail and that China was going to be a juggernaut of economic opportunity, that places like Brazil would be kicking out remarkable internet companies, it would not have even been on our radar for 5 years. And so I think the thing that has to be kept in mind is that the Middle East is going through the very clear and obvious early stages of beginning to have the connectivity, the ambition, the aspiration, the belief, the confidence. I think that it can happen there because so many companies are coming live and funding is coming there in very powerful ways. And so it is no surprise when you look at a region where maybe $1 billion, $1.5 billion is being spent in e-commerce today. Again, as I said before, in a region with a lot of wealth, where the value of total goods being shipped in and around the region, not including commodities like oil, is over $400 billion. I mean, that gap will be filled, right? We're not going to be talking about $1 billion in e-commerce 3 years from now. And when you start kind of going sector by sector and area by area, both for local and regional challenges, opportunities, and think about the global ramifications, that the opportunity is immense, and these are early days, and success breeds success. But it starts with groups like you and others who are literally gathering the best of talent, so not only can they share and brainstorm ideas, but at the same time they can really help and mentor each other up to the next stage.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shadi and Chris. The second question is from Eli Nasser, co-founder of Foo. Eli.
Hi, I'm Eli from Foo. My question is, hello. My question is, what is required from Arab startups to compete on the same level of Israeli startups and to be acquired by global companies?
So I think that there's, again, a very interesting thing that we face right now, which is both an opportunity and poses challenges. The opportunity is that with all this technology in everyone's hands, we have a level affordably to build innovation for local or broader problem solving and opportunities, right? And that's only going to get more. I mean, I say this very often now as I talk around the United States. I can't predict about political uncertainty in the region in the next year, but I can tell everyone with 100% certainty that in the next year, 2 years, 3 years and beyond, lots more, millions more people in the region are going to have access to technology, to smartphones, which are actually really supercomputing, and so this opportunity is going to grow. That gets to the essence of your question, because that's wonderful in and of itself. But the reality now, speaking almost like an investor, is the good news is I could be very excited about the opportunity in the Middle East. The tougher news is I may size up opportunities in the Middle East vis-a-vis other opportunities I may see in other emerging markets and even things that I see here in the United States. If I've crossed the Rubicon where I've made a decision that I'm very interested in the rise of emerging growth markets, I may make a determination about geography, but I'm going to balance it. So what does that mean? That means at the end of the day, great companies have to be great companies. Within the region, the work ethic, the culture, and the solving of local problems, well, that is an opportunity in and of itself. But I think that, a great company like Souq.com, which is a phenomenal company and is an amazing management team and a tremendous amount of tenacity and has built a great platform, more and more is going to be competing with the great e-commerce platforms around the world. And I think that can be tough in the early days of a nascent society, but I think the fact of the matter is it brings everybody's game up. And what ends up happening is established companies like from the United States or Israel, whatever, can learn from other folks and vice versa. And I think net-net, it actually tends to raise all boats in societies around the world.
The third and last question from Limbo Abdallah of Yuka.
Hi, Chris. So my question to you is, how do you see equity crowdfunding or crowd investing change the dynamics of how businesses raise money, specifically in the Middle East?
Can you repeat that question, please?
Chris, I can go ahead and repeat it. I think the connection's a bit bad. It's just understanding the role of crowdsource investing to change the dynamics of how people are raising funds locally. What opportunity do you see for crowdfunding to have an effect in the Middle East?
I think it's one of the most exciting things to watch because it democratizes the ability to have investments. Obviously, in the West, there's been a long history of quote-unquote crowdfunding for publicly traded securities and other things, and we're seeing early signs of it happening not only in the areas of Kickstarter and funding what we might call nonprofit enterprises, but for-profit enterprises finding ways to raise capital. You guys all know, because she's won your competition, Hind Hobaika, who wanted to raise just a little bit of capital, maybe $25,000 or $30,000 to get over the next hump to the next round that she was thinking of raising. And within a couple of weeks, what did she raise? $65,000, $75,000, $80,000? And so when you have little one-off stories like that, you know that we're in the very, very early days. Now, there'll be regulatory issues. There's going to be security and confidence issues. I mean, there's always a risk what happens when people begin to lose money because, investing generally is a very tough kind of a thing. But I think that we're probably going to end up seeing mutual funds and other really interesting ideas where investors who are not sophisticated investors can still crowdfund, but in vehicles and ideas that haven't been invented yet that will take it from something that is very interesting today that'll be very big in years to come. So I think this is something definitely to watch generally, and I think very exciting in a market like yours.
Thank you, everyone. Now let's turn to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, where we have Amar. Amar is coming to us from Astrolabs. It's an e-commerce focused startup accelerator program. Amar, please let us know what questions you have for Chris.
Hello, Chris. This is Ammar from dukkanafkar.com, an e-commerce platform that sells creative and elegantly designed products out of Saudi Arabia. I have a couple of questions I would like to ask you, and my first question is, where do you see the ecosystem of entrepreneurship in the MENA region going, and what is it actually missing? The second question is, what makes a successful entrepreneur in the MENA region if you compare this with an entrepreneur in the western part of the world? And what are the three most important factors on being a successful entrepreneur in the MENA region?
In terms of the question, and you guys again are like our compatriots we just spoke with, you're part of the answer to the question. There's a lot the ecosystem needs. And some of it, candidly, is a little bit out of the control because it's top-down stuff. So I talked a moment ago about the unbelievable opportunity in e-commerce, but as you guys know better than anybody, the simple ability to move a good from one country to another. I remember someone said to me, it was like as if Amazon tried to get formed in the United States with all 50 states having their own regulatory environment, their own fees, their own inspectors. I mean, there's a lot of top-down stuff, which is a weight on the chest of what you guys are trying to do. And hopefully some of that will evolve and success will breed success. But it's a big deal, and we'll see. But what is so exciting is that bottom up, you guys are doing so much, and it's not unlike what you do at Astrolabs and what the other folks that we're talking to today does, which is the art of connecting people within the region, the ability by the definition of technology to connect with mentors, best ideas, essentially all of the world's knowledge at our fingertips now, means that amazing, amazing things that are going to happen despite some of the structural challenges in the region, because as you know better than anyone, the definition of a great entrepreneur is somebody who works around. And I think right now we're seeing this very interesting tension that only time will tell us between what folks are doing bottom up like you and what's happening top down. I think also another thing which I actually find intriguing is that there is a sort of absence of A-round financing. So the irony is now that there's a little bit of angel money throughout the region, once companies get to a point where they actually need real money to grow and expand, that's a little bit harder to find. But even there, I know now of 2 or 3 cases of folks that are raising $100 or $200 million funds specifically for that. So I think there's, again, a success breeds success and timing that we'll be looking for. But it's tough. But what guys like you do, I think, are so important. I remember in my book, the great Silicon Valley venture capitalist legend, Mike Moritz, said something to me that really hit me, which I think is the essence to your final question, which is that whenever and wherever he's been in the world, if he's in a room with great entrepreneurs, it doesn't matter what country, what race, what religion, what sex, anything matters. When you're in the room with a bunch of entrepreneurs anywhere in the world, we're like the same people. We problem solve the same way. We're constantly calculating how to work things around. We don't take no for an answer. We move forward. And a sense of what Ben Horowitz calls kind of a deep courage, not just bravery, but a will to walk through walls to make things happen overall. And I would say that it is a universal. It's not just about the Middle East. And if I had to tell you in some respects what is a 1, 2, or 3 things more important, I think they actually all start with that ability.
Yeah, it's amazing. I actually recently listened to a talk by John Doerr, and he defined an entrepreneur as someone who does more than anyone thought possible with less than anyone thought possible. So essentially just realizing that, you know, you guys are really having a transformative effect with very, very less than people would think is possible. Next, let's find our way to Gaza and the team from the Gaza Sky Geeks, an accelerator program launched by Mercy Corps. Welcome, Hazim and Ahmed. Hazim, what questions do you have for Chris?
Hello, Chris. I'm Hazim from Gaza Sky Geeks Accelerator, which is the first accelerator in Gaza. Actually, we have 2 questions, but people who are going to ask the questions are not here, so I'm going to ask the questions and give them the feedbacks. The first question is for one of our startups. They are a data warehouse and business company, so their products are very costly. It ranges from $50,000 to $500,000. So they are asking about the best payment method to persuade the customers to buy their solutions. That's the first question. And the second, okay.
No, go ahead. Ask them both. That'll be great.
That's the second question. As you know, the Gaza market is a very closed market. So for the entrepreneurs in Gaza, should they just start targeting the global economy, or the global market? Sorry, the global market, or they just have to start with the local market and then they can move forward to the global market? Thank you.
So these are amazing questions, and I think you guys are just unbelievable. I can tell you, as I go around and talk about startups in the Middle East, and I think you women and men are heroes throughout, everywhere, generally speaking. But the question that I can stump audiences most easily on is when I ask them, where do they think the last startup weekend was? And no one in their imagination can imagine that it was Gaza, and that, in fact, the entrepreneurs are doing such amazing things at such scale. So I just can't congratulate you enough, and it's great to see you in person in that way. And I think you're asking very fundamental questions. What happens if you're a relatively closed market, either structurally where you're a very closed market, or if you think about ecosystems like right now Colombia is becoming a very, very interesting ecosystem for which there's an opportunity within it, but now is being able to expand slowly abroad. And I think to your second question overall, to the degree that there is problem solving, which by definition that there is in any society that you can do, I think it's an interesting thing. But I think the opportunities in being able to find ways, to find workarounds, to engage with partners really answers your 2 questions in different ways. So one of the things that I loved that you all did in the Startup Weekend before was you had Oasis 500, the great incubator and really kind of engager and trainer that is in Jordan, come not only to speak to you, but there was follow-up engagement going on, I know, right now in very, very powerful ways. And so that ability to have connectedness with your neighbors, even at that sort of early stage, not only opens up opportunity to think about broader markets, but at the same time opens up opportunity to find business development partners who can help you expand your reach as you asked for in that specific company that you had overall. Because I think partnerships are essential, generally speaking, in this, but I think particularly in the environment that you're talking about overall. But as you know, right now, I mean, what has the potential to be one of the great travel startups in the Middle East is in the West Bank. And that they're not just thinking about West Bank travel. I mean, these guys, YamSafe, are thinking about, you know, how this can be everywhere else. And I don't think that even how difficult and impossible the circumstances may feel to you on any given day, that through just the raw audacity that you possess and the skills that you have, you'll find ways to be able to look differently, but it'll be tough. I mean, the good news about the local market is you're there, you can do it, you can execute it more efficiently, and you can do well enough. But I know from the talent that I've met and talked to that there'll be opportunities with time that will be broader with that as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Hazim, for joining us. Now let's go to Beirut, where our partner WAMDA just completed a Mix and Mentor event. Mix and Mentor events bring together early-stage entrepreneurs with experienced mentors. We're really happy to have you with us. Welcome, Stephanie, and the startups from WAMDA.
Thank you, Bridget. I'm here with Randa from Lactivity, Rayan from Trifid, and Rakan from Al-Arab, three very promising startups. So our first question is, what are some main challenges, Chris, you faced at Health Central you think can be avoided by health portals or portals in the region?
First of all, it's great to see you guys. I just love what you're doing overall. As a quick digression, one of the things I love about Mix and Mentor is not only at scale are you ability to bring people together, self-teach, expand relationships that you do so well, but what I love is that I went to one of your first Mix and Mentors, and I think everyone was feeling their way out, and I would sit at a table, and everyone would sort of just turn to me and ask all the questions. I did a Mix and Mentor a few months ago, and it was like I was totally irrelevant. The minute one entrepreneur asked a question, another entrepreneur immediately answered it. Everyone just started sharing ideas at the table. And in a way, that's one of the most powerful things that you're doing. It's great to bring in mentors because we who've been through stuff can bring something to the table. But once you see the ecosystem really educating itself, that's where I think you've got something really amazing. So I congratulate you on that. To your question, look, the health space is a very, very interesting space, and there are a lot of very tough elements about it that are particular to the American market, not least of which is that marketing, advertising, is actually very heavily regulated by our FDA, which is our major health regulatory body. So there are a bunch of things that are difficult for us from an advertising perspective, which was the model that you had to work around patiently. But I think the biggest lesson globally to learn is that health is not just a different vertical. I can't tell you the number of venture capitalists I've met elsewhere who say, well, you know, travel is work, so we're going to make the travel of health or whatever. And I think what people miss is how unique, personal, and individualistic health is to us. That many often, particularly if we're suffering something that's very tough, like a parent who's ill or whatever, obviously there's nothing more important to us, but we don't. It's not like sharing music, right? It's not something that we want to be thinking about all the time, engaging about all the time. We don't want to be defined by it at the same time. And I think building environments where you're very sensitive with it, what makes the health exchange so different, I think, is very powerful. And the last observation I would make is I went into Health Central thinking that a condition or an activity was kind of the organizing principle for health seekers. So marathon runners would be a certain thing. God forbid, if someone has breast cancer people would want to be together. And what you learn is people go to very specific targets very quickly. So if you're a woman 29 to 32 with a child and you've been diagnosed with a certain condition, it's not that you don't care what a 65-year-old went through, but in a way you don't. You want to really find people who are of you, like you, sharing the life experience is so powerful. And when you open up environments where people can find not just expertise and shared experience, but my shared experience and a connectivity, I think you have something very, very exciting. So that would be my observation on that.
Awesome. Thanks. Our second question is, do you see a lot of similarities between the mistakes made by startups you advise in New York and startups you observe here?
So the ecosystem challenges that we've talked a lot about here obviously are very unique, and they're history, cultural, societal things which become very unique. I think that, you know, the whole discussion about how a culture or how a region or how life thinks about things like failure and these tougher aspects of startups, you know, I think evolve and change over time. But I really go back to what Mike Moritz said, which is that great entrepreneurs are a global, universal phenomenon. And so every city, every location, New York is very different from California, I can tell you, is utterly different than Washington, D.C. Canada is different than the United States. India is different than Brazil. There are absolutely unique aspects and unique workarounds, but the spirit of it, the drive of it, the determination of it, the effectively, there's nothing else I could be doing other than this mentality that comes with women and men. I think there's much more that is shared there than is unique.
Wonderful. Thank you, Wamda. Thank you for joining us, Stephanie and teams. Finally, let's connect with Flat 6 Labs and our Google Developer Group leader in Cairo. Welcome, Noor and Roddy. Noor, we'll let you get started with your questions.
Sure. Thank you very much for having us. My name is Noor Ahmadain. I'm the community manager at Flat 6 Labs Cairo, a startup accelerator here in Egypt. We actually just launched in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Hi, Astro Labs. So a question that we have for you today, the first question is, recent polls show that at any startup gathering here, most startup gatherings here in the Middle East, there's about a 40% turnout of women. So how come we're not seeing more success stories from female entrepreneurs?
So I think it's actually a debatable premise. One of the things that I hear all the time here is where are the exits in the Middle East, as if that is the only determiner of success overall. And look, I mean, what's been happening in the region over the last couple of years is, massive and major and revolutionary at every area. And I would suggest that the kind of classic Silicon Valley view that exit tells us everything is something that we need to think about as we look at any kind of a startup, whether or not, it doesn't matter whether it's a woman or man who's running it overall. I mean, as you guys know right now, some amazing companies there have received pretty interesting funding at good valuations, and you don't hear about them. You don't read about them as much. I mean, the Wanda.com guys are very good at getting it out there. But if you look across the spectrum, I mean, from one of the great pioneers of startups in the region, ask Rhonda Ayubi if she's not successful, if that company's not successful. I dare you to be in person with a May Habib and question her success, because you can handle that one without me. I mean, there's just no way that you can really see that. And so I think that sometimes we think about the success vehicle for one metric, and that metric is not irrelevant because it does have success breed success, right? We still talk about Maktub, the Yahoo of the Middle East from 4 years ago, and there more of those will have, I think, great impact on the ecosystem and about investors and other things. But I don't believe in any stretch that women entrepreneur-backed businesses are any different than male-backed businesses in that overall metric. I think the whole phenomenon is interesting, and we'll see what is pent up and being developed underneath the covers that we'll all be hearing more about over the next 2 years.
Okay, great. Thank you. The second question, well, we obviously always hear the cliche that China is the future. We all know that China is a major powerhouse for industrial and manufacturing solutions oftentimes. What do you think MENA's verticals and potential focal points moving forward? What do you think our strengths will be in terms of industry moving forward?
I think one of the amazing things about internet and about the software now is not only that it is ubiquitous in every people's hands, but it surprises you. Things and opportunities rise that you never would have expected before, because when people have access to stuff, they just come up with interesting solutions. I mean, there was a time that in my life, not in your lifetime, but in my lifetime, that if we thought great consumer electronics or handheld mobile devices were going to be created in Finland or in Japan or in Korea, no scenario for that. And yet all of a sudden something rose that was so powerful and became global. It's interesting to me that there has not yet been really a global software company of that scale almost anywhere. But it actually begs a more interesting question. A lot of times we in the West think of global startups as you made it in America. But you know something? I don't think that Baidu has spent 15 seconds, or Tencent is spending 15 seconds thinking about, gee, what a shame that we didn't make it in New York. And so one of the big stories going forward is that there's such opportunity expanding in so many emerging markets everywhere that I think we're going to see surprising opportunities that will come from many different areas. Particularly the Middle East, having said everything that I said, I spent a lot of time asking myself and very impressed by startups in the mobile space over there, because in the Arab world, as I mentioned before, this is a region that fundamentally never knew landlines. And so I'm seeing in M-payments and other areas really intriguing things that we may be talking about, not only at a regional scale, emerging market to emerging market scale, but even global scale over time. And I got to tell you, the innovation in using solar power, I think, is phenomenal. And a lot of that can solve problems like access to water or desalinization there. But let me tell you something, water usage and access is a global challenge. And why would we be surprised at some of the really interesting innovations in using new energy technologies to apply to a problem that may be more immediate there, won't have multiplier ramifications going forward. But I don't want to take out consumer internet, because again, Souk.com, Maktub, others within the region are doing things that are so powerful, you really don't know what will happen once it becomes so easy to translate and expand beyond. So there are sectors that intrigue me for the obvious reasons I've described. But I think the most beautiful thing about the world, as Mark Andreessen said, being eaten by software is we're going to be surprised and shouldn't limit our imagination, I think, in some Michael Porter structure that one country should only be doing X.
A wonderful question. Thank you, Noor. It reminds me of a statement I heard recently where someone said, Every company in the world is a software company. They may just have planes or boxes in front.
I couldn't agree with that more. I could not agree with that more.
I lived that for real when a airline I was flying on had a software breakdown and they completely shut down. And I think that that's an opportunity that we see driving a lot of innovation forward, and also in the Middle East I think is ripe for the taking. But what a terrific set of questions from our participants, and we thank all of you for joining us in the evening in the midst of a bunch of storms and the internet connections. You've done a fantastic job. We could not be more grateful for your time and energy. I have 2 more questions left for Chris, real quickly from me. I would like to know, if you were to start a company in the Middle East today, what would it be?
Well, I mean, maybe the better thing to do is to answer as an investing perspective. I have to tell you that in the short term, as an investor, I think the e-commerce opportunity there is just remarkable. And I think infrastructure, both top-down and bottom-up, is only opening up, right? There's a reason our friends over at PayPal opened up operations in the last year. But I think more interestingly, why there's so many interesting startups within the region who are thinking about the payment issue and the moving of goods issues. And great juggernauts like Fadi's, Aramex, and others are trying to do everything they can to embrace the ecosystem to build goods. And so I think that something like that is going to be very, very interesting. But I got to tell you, the second category, which I talk about in the book, are the young entrepreneurs I call the problem solvers, who are looking at things like education. They're looking at infrastructure problems like recycling that are substantive there. And I think a lot of those ideas are incredibly scalable and interest me no end. So, you know, not unlike my last answer, there's an opportunistic view there. Even in my old field, the healthcare field right now, we know the diabetes rates are in the Middle East and other stuff. I mean, all you have to do is look out 3 years and see what are the problems and see how software can be brought to bear to them. And it actually becomes the kind of thing that 3 years from now, looking back, we'll say, oh, of course, we should have known that. But the fact is we do know it now, and the best entrepreneurs are building towards it.
It's great. This rolls perfectly into my next question, which is, what is your one piece of advice for young startups in the region, really pushing their teams forward, really trying to make a great product? What would you tell them to keep in the forefront of their vision?
You know, there's so much written and so much advice, and people my age sort of, you know, pontificate about what people should be doing and all sorts of things. So what I'll do instead is I'll share with you something that was said to me a few years ago that I wish was said to me in my 20s, and that may be the best way I can do it. And this great, great entrepreneur in the States told me, remember that life is more, for you mathematicians, life is more of a sine wave than an arrow. You know, we all think that once you get into the internet and you build things, everything is go-go, forgetting that almost every overnight success that has happened anywhere took like 7 years, right? And what we forget is that in that journey where we pivot and have to change things and so on, that it really goes up and down. And what really matters about you and your team is where you are at the low end of a sine wave, right? Everybody loves each other where anybody's going great, but it's actually where you're most humble, where you're more saying, I'm going to get back up on that hill, and I know it's going to happen, and I know how to get there, and it's going to be in this company, or maybe it'll be in my next company. The whole psychology of understanding that and bringing it to bear to you and to your fellow leaders and to your employees, most importantly, I think is what helps one navigate through the low ends and have really, really interesting outcomes when they work. So I loved that analogy. I wish I'd known it earlier.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's definitely true, I think, in the life of an entrepreneur and in pretty much everyone's life, is just to keep climbing back on top of that hill.
Couldn't agree more.
Thank you so much for joining us, Chris. This was really wonderful. A great way to start our day here in the U.S. and a great way to end our day in MENA. We just want to give you the sincerest gratitude for your time, and everyone, we ask that you have a wonderful and safe evening, and hope to see you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.